Hello, my name is Brett Bendistis, and this is a video lecture on the importance of blue booking and specifically full primary citation forms. The purpose of this lecture is to give you a good idea of how to develop your blue book citations and how to figure them out specifically. Before we get too far into blue booking, I want to address the elephant in the room when it comes to blue book citations, which are two things. One, doing blue book citations are boring. Two, they're really hard. Right? So it is not the sort of task where you're going to find this great level of value, like developing constitutional law, or let's say getting someone away with murder or something like that. It's a very technical process that is often very complicated. So it's one of those things where it is not going to be an easy task to go through, but I want to sort of address both of those concerns. Now, when it comes to how hard blue book citations are, we'll get to that in a second. But I really want to get into first the importance of blue book citations and maybe not how they're not boring, but at least how they're important enough that it's good for you to be able to develop how everything's working. You might notice the topic of this blue book lecture is Eddie Van Halen. And you might ask yourself, well, what does Eddie Van Halen have to do with blue book citations? The key thing there is a very long time ago, maybe in another life per se, I used to play drums in a punk rock band. And we were recording a CD one time, and we were bringing up the anecdote about 80s metal giants Van Halen, right? And the story regarding Van Halen was that they would constantly ask for a bowl of brown M&Ms at every single venue they went to, right? And the thought regarding Van Halen was that they were just crazy, or they were jerks. You know, they were just driving people crazy. And the person who recorded this actually brought up the fact that the reason why Van Halen did that was not to just be petulant, but because a venue that was sure to make sure their M&Ms were there were more likely to make sure that the particular levels that Van Halen was used to or needed to create the sound that they were doing would be making sure that they would get those both together, right? So the idea being that if you put something ridiculous on your rider and they do it, they're more likely to make David Lee Roth's voice sound better, make sure Eddie Van Halen's guitar has that particular tone, and that the intro to Hot for Teacher sounds like the way the intro for Hot for Teacher should sound like. I feel like that same approach is particular with blue book citations, because even if you might go and say, well, I could work somewhere and they're never going to ask me to do blue book citations, the level of particularity and detail required to do them is similar to the level of detail you're going to require to have if you work in any type of law office. So if you're a paralegal and you're good at blue book citations, it means you're also probably good with filing. You're good with making sure that things don't get lost, right? If you're an attorney and you're good at blue booking, it shows that you're particular with deadlines and that you're good at writing. And the same thing with the judge's clerk. So I think that while you look at blue book citations and you go, well, maybe I could just disregard this and then pick it up later, the number one thing about blue booking that we're going to get into as we move forward with this lecture is that the slower you take everything, the faster it'll all go, right? So as we move forward here, the first thing I want to note is that you actually have your blue book in front of you, okay? If you don't have your blue book in front of you, take a second, stop, and go get it. And if you still haven't gotten it by now, literally just turn off the video. Because the number one thing about blue booking that we're going to talk about right here is that every answer you need is going to be in the blue book, okay? Like there are no answers within the blue book that are, there's no answers that anyone's going to ask you to memorize. It's just not one of those things that's what the blue book works. Anyone who asks you to memorize anything out of that book is probably a monster, and you'll always have your blue book with you. So I don't think that the blue book is one of those things where you shouldn't always have that blue book in front of you when you do any assignment. And what we're going to go over today is just touch base on a few very particular pages that make sure that you're aware of, so when you have these assignments, you know exactly where to look, right? So rule one. If every answer is within your blue book, make sure you always have your blue book with you, okay? There's literally 3 or 4 pages out of the whole thing that whenever you have a problem, as long as you turn to those pages, you're going to be okay. Number 2, do not try to memorize anything out of the blue book. I still, after teaching legal citations and legal research for many years, being a lawyer for 10 years, still try to memorize things, and it is a frivolous waste of time. If you try to memorize anything, if you try to guess out of anything, that is the number one reason why people get answers wrong when they shouldn't. They don't have to. So make sure that anytime you have a question regarding the blue book, you're checking the blue book to make sure it's there. 3, this is again another thing where the slower you take it, the faster you'll go, which is double check all your answers against examples provided in class and in the blue book. So commonly, including in this lecture, there's going to be a PowerPoint that gives you an example of a primary citation. If you're doing citations, make sure you have it in front of you, because if yours looks like this, you're probably right. I mean, that's like a very common form. If you've got commas where there shouldn't be commas, that's probably a problem. If you've got italics where there's no italics, it's probably a problem. So, two things are, before you get started, break open your Blue Book. After you're done, check the Blue Book, check the handouts, and make sure yours look like the ones that are provided, and you're going to be okay. The other key thing I want to note regarding Blue Book citations, and I have found this out the hard way, which is that the internet, for some reason, has not been a good cheat sheet when it comes to Blue Book citations. I know, it's a drag. You'd figure somebody would figure it out at some point, but there is no substitute for just doing the work as it is, right? Finally, all Blue Book citations must be accurate. It seems like a nominal thing, right? Because all you're doing is making sure that people can tell that you're citing something. However, you have to make sure that when you're citing something, someone knows exactly where to find it. And that value of making sure that your information is easy to find adds to the persuasiveness of your arguments. So, in total, making sure your Blue Book citations are going to help you in your career. They're going to help your writing do a little bit better, and they're not that hard. So the big thing we're going to go over right here is just a few very easy steps you can go over when you're doing your primary citations, parallel citations, and unreported citations. Let's take this case right here, right? Haynes versus First National State Bank of New Jersey. It is found in the the Atlantic Reporter, and it's in New Jersey. It's in 1981. Right? So this is the full citation form. We can all agree here. The one nice thing about your Blue Book, and I'm not going to link to your Blue Book because you have to have it in front of you when you do this, is that whenever you are looking for a broad form, look in the table of contents and the index, because those are two fantastic resources in addition to the either side of either page, right? Like those give you samples. So if you can look at the samples, that's always going to be important. They have to really look kind of similar. The number one thing about Blue Booking citations as well is that you can really split it up into three big sections. So you've got the name of the parties, the reporter information, and then the court information. If we go backwards, right? So Haynes versus First National State Bank is the parties. It's the plaintiff versus the defendant. The 432A.2D 891 is the reporter information, and then the parentheses is the court information. When it comes to Blue Booking citations, the reason we cite things is to show people that we're using someone else's information, which is important, because at the end of the day, I'm just a lawyer, right? I mean, I don't want to convince the judge that I'm right because I'm just smart. I want to convince the judge that I'm right because they have to follow this particular ruling, right? So it's not a matter of I don't go to court being like, trust me, I'm smart. I go to court being like, this is all the law that you have to follow. So that's why these citations are so important, because you're really trying to compel the court to make a decision that you feel like is accurate, right? So one, you're showing that you're citing something. You're showing someone where to find it. That's really where the next section, the 432A2D 890, we'll get to that in a second. The last section, which is also important, which is the NJ 1981, shows the precedential value of your case. You should be able to look at any Blue Book citation and know exactly what the precedential value is, meaning whether it's in your jurisdiction, right? And how old it is. So that's the really value here. Whenever you're sort of not sure where things are put in, if there's extra information or this, that, and the other thing, follow those three rules and you might be able to find that you're canceling things out that might be there. These pages in particular are really important, okay? So I have the 19th edition and the 20th edition. So note what edition you have, because there could be some sort of different things. We've got name of the parties, reporter information, court information. One suggestion I'll commonly make is, if you're having trouble with your citations, if you go to Microsoft Word and do 1, 2, and 3, and then once you've got them, sort of delete them back up, you got your citations, right? So there are a million different ways to do this. You don't have to do it the perfect way. Let's first start with name of the parties, right? So we have Haynes versus First National State Bank of New Jersey. It's first plaintiff versus first defendant, right? So if there's any other people in there, we kick them out. It's only first plaintiff, first defendant, and we remove the first names of proper parties. So Haynes was a person, we remove their first name, they're gone. There's a nuance with criminal law that I just want to cover really quickly before I double back onto the other section, which is criminal law deals with this way. You probably heard this in Law and Order, where it's the people versus Brett Bendistis, right? Criminal law isn't the people of Delaware, the people of New York. It's only people. For Delaware, it's state. For Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, it's Commonwealth. Instead of putting Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, it's just Commonwealth. So that's a nuance with criminal law you have to be particular with. And then it's the same rule at the end where you just remove the first name. The one thing I really want to note that is a very easy thing that commonly gets passed, but you shouldn't have to worry about it, which is the First National State Bank of New Jersey. Notice the fact that national is abbreviated, right? The key thing about that is you want to make sure that there are keywords that are going to be found in Table 6 of your Blue Book that allow you to be abbreviated. Okay? The key thing about those abbreviations is you have to check them. So you can't guess. You can't say, well, I think this is what it is. It literally is just turning the page. So please, whenever you have any type of corporate name, double back through the page and go over it, because it's going to be a really valuable thing to make sure you've got that from there. When it comes to the reporter information, it is volume first and then the first page last, right? So it is volume 432. The page starts on 891. There are, and I want to go to the bottom thing, remove unnecessary commas. There's no commas in there. There's just commas for pinpoint citations. We'll cover that for another day. The key thing is finding the court in the federal section relates specifically to the court information, federal and state, right? Pages, we'll say we'll go with the 20th edition. Page 233 and 248. Fold those pages over right now. So turn your Blue Book to those pages and fold them over, because you're going to find that having those pages on handy is going to solve all of your problems with these Blue Book citations. 233 starts with the federal court, all right? And then 248 starts with the state court. So if you have to cite something from any jurisdiction, you want to find that jurisdiction first. So what we mentioned before here on the reporter information, find the court in the federal section. If you have to find, let's say, a circuit court, right? You'll see the fact that the first page is Supreme Court, and if you scroll down, it goes Court of Appeals. There's a few other federal courts, and at the end, there's district courts. If you go underneath that section, you're going to notice that it's going to list the reporter that's there, and it will give you sort of an abbreviation of the reporter included in here, right? That's how easy it is to put this middle section together. And that's the same thing with the Atlantic Digest here. If we turn to New Jersey, you're going to note the fact that this is a Supreme Court case, N.J, and that A.2D is the Atlantic Reporter that's important. So if we know the Atlantic Reporter is there, and we know that it's New Jersey, this is how we can just double check that those citations are there, right? And we're going to scroll down to the next slide. Court information, circuits are numbered, and then the form is listed right there. I just want to note the fact that second and third is 2D and 3D, that you're just putting the year and not the full date, and you're putting it in parentheses. Again, nothing too crazy, but just sort of balancing everything out. I think if you're looking at them and you're having a hard time conceptualizing how the whole thing goes together, I just want to point out the fact that it is 1, 2, and 3, and getting those 1, 2, and 3 is really important. So the number one thing is make sure you have those pages folded over and make sure you go from there. Before I take off, I just want to go over two more little nuances. One is parallel citations, right? Parallel citations are cases with two reporters, and the reason why we have these is it sort of is something that was developed when there was no Lexis, right? I always think that Lexis has developed legal research the way that ESPN developed fantasy football, or the way that Amazon developed shopping, depending on how you view the internet and how the internet works for you. Before, in order to do research, you needed to have possession of reporters, okay? There are times where it wouldn't make sense for you to have the Atlantic Reporter. Like, I practice just in Delaware. The Atlantic Reporter has cases from 5 different states. They'd be a waste of my bookshelf, right? But I would only have Delaware. So the key thing here is parallel citations require you to put 2 different reporters within the citation form, and they're just separated by a comma, right? It's nothing too crazy and complicated. The form is, again, it's within your index and your table of contents. So make sure if you're being asked to do it, you just check the form and you do the same things that we've covered before. Finally, there's a nuance regarding unreported case law that I think is an important thing to note. The number one thing is, and this is a form that sort of covers both of the 19th and 20th, the basis that I really think is important is the 1981 N.J. Lexis 1668. That's what I really want to cover the most. That bulk form right there is the same thing as this, this right here, the 432 A2D 890, meaning that instead of having a reporter information, Lexis categorizes and gives new terms to every single form that comes out. Therefore, when you see 1981 NJ Lexis 1668, do not amend it, do not edit it, do not change it, do not change anything. It has to stay exactly the same because that's how you find the citation form. So please don't change that. The only other nuance is right here where we have the full date instead of just the date. Now, there are some jurisdictions which include the case number. There are other jurisdictions which don't include the case number. That case number would be included right in there. So check your jurisdiction to make sure it's there, and depending on the Blue Book. So it's an important thing to note that you're checking the Blue Book and being as particular as possible, right? So key thing with Blue Book citations, open the book. Seems very easy, but you got to do it. Other thing with Blue Book citations is take your time. Do not worry about rushing through them. The more you rush through them, it's going to take you harder to get them all done. So just relax, take a deep breath, and everything will be just fine, right? If you're interested in this video, please check out my other videos on YouTube. Otherwise, please check out my podcast, which is The Citizen's Guide to the Supreme Court, which is located on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and I don't know, the internet, right? Otherwise, thank you guys very much for listening, and I hope you guys learned something today.